At Carafem, you can choose the abortion care that works best for you. With in-person visits in Atlanta, Chicago, and the D.C. area, or medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. Some people feel more comfortable meeting with a provider in person and leaving either no longer pregnant or with pills in hand. Others prefer getting abortion pills by mail. Just fill out a short online form and, if eligible, your medication arrives in a few days in a plain package. When you choose abortion pills, Cara, our text-based abortion companion, is with you every step of the way, offering 24/7 support and answers whenever you need them. However you get care, Carafem will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carafem.org.
In Walmart's Who Newville, joy started to grow. For online-only savings sure to steal the show. Tech treats and toys so dazzling and new. Walmart Cyber Monday deal soon ready for you. It's online only with very little time to spare. December 1st will soon be here, so be sure to be there. The Who's are prepared. Are you ready too? A day packed with savings. Amazing! Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
Get your mother-loving ears on because your big-time radio DJ's got news. PayPal lets you choose how you want to pay for all the stuff. With PayPal, I can pay in-store, pay online, or pay over time. What's that? You want this translated into song? I hope you're sitting down. You can pay your own way. You keep those ears on, you hear? Don't just pay, baby. PayPal.
Learn more at paypal.com.
And from that first meeting as well, she showed me probably the most incredible historical source I've ever seen, which really did level me, which were letters, handwritten letters from Frank, dated December 1943, so just after he'd got back from Europe. And he'd written to John's mother and father saying, I'm so sorry John was killed. I feel terrible. I was the captain and I survived and he didn't. And these were his last words. And, you know, he was a great man, etc., etc. And then John's parents' reply to Frank as well. And my God, that was quite difficult to see and not get emotional.
Before we start, I want to mention there are live events upcoming. This Thursday, the 9th of October, I'll be interviewing Roger Morehouse on his new U-boat book, Wolfpack, at the Tring Book Festival in Hertfordshire. Then, on Saturday the 1st of November, at the Imperial War Museum, London, at 10 a.m, I'm speaking with Tessa Dunlop and Ian McGregor as part of the Podcast Live show, where I and others will be broadcasting our pods in front of a live audience. Links for both these events are in the show notes, or head to their respective websites, and I hope to see you there. Hello. On the night of the 14th of August 1943, a Halifax bomber approached the Savoie region of southeast France. Coming under fire from the ground, the aircraft was hit and only one airman survived, Squadron Leader Frank Griffiths. Now alone and in German-occupied territory, he began the perilous journey to the British overseas territory of Gibraltar. Joining me is Adam Hart, Frank's great-grandson, as he followed in his footsteps to tell this remarkable story. Adam, great pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, I was very keen to speak to you, even though, and I have to admit this, you know, for the listeners as well, that it's taken, I think, months to try and get you on. And that's my fault, nothing to do with Adam. But the reason why I was very keen was this story, which is a really interesting story of your great-grandfather, Frank Griffiths, and his experience as a pilot flying a Halifax in August 1943. But then also, you then there's a travel element to this book as well, which is what piqued my interest. And so you then follow in his footsteps, because spoiler alert, Frank's plane shot down. But then you trace his sort of escape across much of Southwest Europe. And so I I guess my first question is, was this a story that had been in your families for a long time and you've kind of always wanted to follow in his footsteps?
Yeah, yes and no, I'd say. So Frank's epic escape, as it were, from Europe in the war was always like a family legend, like this mythical story in the family that everybody knows and everybody talks about at Sunday lunches, and is like a big part of our family history. Growing up, I was always told it and heard the story lots of times. But I never met Frank, so he died 4 years before I was born in 1996. And I guess I just kind of took it for granted as a bit of a family story. I never thought when I was growing up, like, oh, I'd love to go out and retrace him. I don't know why, because I love history and the Second World War, and I've always been interested in the story. It just never really, I don't know, just never really registered as a teenager as something to do. And then I've got really lucky with this amazing opportunity in 2022 when I was just finishing a journalism masters, and there was a bursary, travel journalism bursary, which I applied to go and retrace Frank's journey from where he was shot down, the crash site, to his eventual point where he was flown back to the UK from Gibraltar. Went out and did the journey in 2022, and I was going to write one 1,000-word article for a newspaper, and it ended up with an 80,000-word published book, which is fairly remarkable and still feels quite weird to say, and was never ever the plan. But yeah, so amazing.
Well, so the book's called Operation Pimento. So really, we should probably talk about what that operation was and what Frank was embarking on.
That is a good place to start, exactly. So Operation Pimento, so actually go back a little bit more. So Frank was an RAF pilot. He was squadron leader in 138 Squadron, who were special duty squadron based at RAF Tempsford in Bedfordshire, which is this really unusual, fascinating airfield and fascinating squadron. They were basically the sort of operating arm of the SOE, as it were. So they were called the Cloak and Dagger Squadrons, the Moonlight Squadrons, the Tempsford Taxis. Basically, it was their job to fly in war material and Sten guns and explosives and money and things like that to resistance groups in Europe. And then their other job was to drop in SOE agents to then hopefully train and organize those resistance groups as well. And so that's what Frank was doing at Tempsford. He flew Halifaxes. They also flew Lysanders and Hudsons and lots of other aircraft like that. But that's what he was doing. And Operation Pimento was, at the time for him, just another operation, his 16th at Tempsford. And it involved flying to southeast France, to near Annecy, which is in the Savoie region of France. And he was to drop heavy explosives to a guerrilla group in the area. And they were going to use explosives to blow up tunnels linking France and Italy through the Alps. Reason being, this was August 1943. The Allied invasion of Italy was coming in September at Salerno. The Allies knew once that had happened, German reinforcements would be coming down through France, through the Alps, into Italy, and try to push the Allies back into the sea. So these explosives and the operation was all about trying to slow up that arrival of reinforcements. So that's what it was all about, really. I guess that was a sort of strategic aim. But obviously, as the book reveals, it didn't quite work out.
No. Tragedy strikes. And actually, it is tragic because Frank is the only survivor from the crash, isn't he?
Yeah, it is tragic. Yeah. He only survivor of a 7-man crew, so 6 crew killed, who had an average age of 23, so which was the same age as I was when I went out and retraced the journey, which was just quite an interesting and sad thing. And also, so there's 6 crew who died, and also 5 civilians as well, which is obviously perhaps even more tragic. They were just killed in their homes as Frank's aircraft, basically Frank's Halifax, crashed into a village, demolished about half the village, started this
engine trouble, wasn't it?
Well, actually, so this was a big part of the book is why this actually happened. Why did he crash? And for years,
you don't have to reveal it if you're concerned for listeners.
Well, for years he thought it was engine failure. They were flying low level, middle of the night in the Alps with mountains either side, so not a good place to be, and it wouldn't take much to crash. He subsequently discovered after the war that it was actually an Italian soldier, Italy occupying this part of France in 1943, had actually basically loosened off a few shots, small arms fire, and severed the fuel pipe in one of the wings and drained both engines on that wing of fuel, and therefore sealed the fate of the Halifax. So, I mean, absolute miracle shot. And yeah, tragedy strikes when Frank crashes into this village. 11 people are killed, and somehow he survives. He's the only one who survives.
Well, that you I think flew to Geneva via EasyJet, slightly less glamorous way of arriving. But I was trying to find on Google Maps because there's a memorial of where the plane crashed that you write about, that you go and visit, your sort of first stopping point.
Exactly. Yes, this was the starting point of my retracing. And again, I think I'd seen photos of this memorial before, but I'd never actually been. Again, like the kind of taking the story for granted in my family. So obviously it was a natural place to start, and it's it's next to a main road, but it's a lovely stone monument in the shape of a Halifax tail, and it has the 11 names of the crew and the civilians who were killed. And you can look around and sort of imagine how it happened. The hill, where he remembers subsequently walking up after the crash is still there. The gorge with the little stream in the bottom is still there, and he remembers the Halifax fuel running out into this stream, which was on fire, and it became like this river, like this stream of fire. And there are certain things you can still imagine which are the same. But also it was just a corner of an industrial park, basically next to a busy road, and was also nothing special at all. But that may be there because I was there in October. One thing I learned, which was absolutely lovely thing I learned when I was out there, was that this little village still hold a memorial service every August, marking this crash, this tragedy. And I spoke to some locals there and the local council there and stuff. And it is incredible to see how much they still care about this story. And above all, how much they're still thankful for those 6 lads, those 6 crewmates of Frank's who were killed. Despite the fact that they crashed into their village, destroyed those buildings, killed those people, they're still thankful for what they did. And they still believe that they died trying to help them, which is, of course, what they were doing. And yeah, 80 years on, and I come back and I remember I went into the town hall and introduced myself as this person, Frank Griffiths, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh my God, yeah, we know all about this, blah, blah, blah. And then they had this booklet of their little village history. There was like a whole chapter dedicated to Frank and the crash, and gave me a copy for free and like treated me as like a hero and stuff like that. This was my first experience of it. Yeah. And anyway, what I later learned was that was a sign of things to come for the rest of the journey.
Yes, I was really enjoyed your interactions with locals because, I mean, like as you say, 5 civilians on the ground are killed in the crash as a direct consequence. So I suppose we should be blaming the Italian for his lucky shot, but and they were they're not part. They're in occupied France, and so the risk to the civilians, because he's now sort of part of a kind of Frank then becomes as a kind of, he's in this sort of system in a way, as it were, to try and get him out. MI9 is this sort of listeners may be familiar with MI9, which is this hugely successful organization, but the risk to them, even with Italian troops in charge of them, not the dreaded Nazis, is considerable, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And even though this part of France is Italian occupied, there's still German fingerprints everywhere you look, and there's still Gestapo around. There's still close cooperation between the Italians and the Germans. So yeah, the risks are absolutely enormous. I mean, if you met people who Second World War, people interested in the Second World War probably know about the terrible things that happened to French resistance members, as obviously they weren't treated as combatants with a uniform and the Geneva Convention. They were immediately, executed if they were lucky without being tortured and deported first. And the fate that awaited them was often far worse than pilots or airmen who'd been shot down, who hopefully would be treated as a POW and, under, the Geneva Convention. And this is 1943 as well. This is not the end of the war. This is not late 1944, when lots of France had seen who was going to be the winner. So the people who were helping Frank in summer 1943, it's difficult to comprehend the risk they were taking, and also the amount of times where they just did it instantaneously without thinking. It was just, this is what I'm going to do. I mean, for example, after the crash, the first person Frank comes across, bearing in mind he's bleeding, passing in and out, throwing up, he's badly injured. The first person he comes across is a 14-year-old boy on a bike. And this boy has immediately cycled to the crash site. And he comes across Frank and he says, "Get on my bike. I'm going to take you to safety." And folds semi-conscious Frank over his bike and somehow pushes it away to his family home, where he's then given first aid and hidden. And then he's taken into the sort of system by the resistance proper, as it were. But yeah, I mean, it's just remarkable. And during that little episode, another 14-year-old boy, a friend of the of Rene, his name was, comes out from the night as well, and also helps push this bike up the hill with Frank on it to his mum's house. And he's later, in 1944, he's later arrested and killed by the Gestapo. 14-year-old boy. So it's just an absolute bonkers story, and the bonkers risks that they were taking. And I guess really one of the things that came out of the trip, and having done the research around it as well, was Frank, obviously, my great grandfather and like the RAF hero and secret midnight missions and all that. But actually, it was really like these ordinary French people who were risking so much more and were in many ways even more heroic and even braver. Yeah, I guess that was one of the big takeaways and one of the big motivations for actually trying to write it all down when I got back.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased about this element of the story because, particularly on this podcast, we've had a few episodes discussing collaboration during the war in France, which is, as a Francophile myself, it always is terribly disappointing. But this is really heartwarming stuff to read. I mean, Frank, of course, wrote his own account of his experience, which I know, obviously, you relied upon, or to a certain extent, I should probably say. But did he give a kind of indication of what the sort of like a rough percentage of those who were willing to help him? Was he warned about other French civilians he should not approach and that kind of thing?
He didn't, but when I was on my journey, I met up with the niece of this 14-year-old boy, and I spoke to her and her son for 3 hours probably, even though I didn't speak French and they didn't speak English. And it was this lovely.
How was that then, Adam?
A lot of hand gestures.
You were speaking increasingly louder as well.
I hope not. But it was just this lovely, lovely meeting we had. And anyway, one of the questions I did ask her, and obviously which you've just said, is, what was the sort of, did Rene tell you, what was the sort of balance of resistor to collaborator, and how lucky was it that Frank just stumbled into the arms of the resistance straight away? And she thought that she'd been told in the area at the time it was roughly 50-50. She thought about half the town would have been collaborating with the Germans or with the Italians, and half not. So,
yeah, 50% chance.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess the luck played out there, whereas it didn't with the shooting down. I mean, but this is just only the first few miles of the journey. I mean, and this journey takes a very long time as well. I mean, it's months. I mean, how long did it take for you to travel?
I did it in 1 month, and Frank's journey took 3.5 months.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but there are live events upcoming, and I was sure you wanted to hear about it. First, for those near Tring in Hertfordshire, I will be in conversation with great friend of the show, Roger Morehouse, discussing his new book, Wolfpack, on Thursday, the 9th of October at 7:45 p.m. Tickets can be found at the Tring Book Festival website or in the show notes. Second, Saturday 1st of November at 10 a.m, I will be at the Imperial War Museum London for the podcast live show. You'll be able to attend and listen to me and great friends of the show, Tessa Dunlop and Ian McGregor, as we discuss Hiroshima and memorialising war. There will also be a number of other great indie history pods, including History Raid. So again, head to the IWM website or find the link in the notes to this episode. And I hope to see you there. Now back to the show. Are you the sort of person who finds it difficult to approach people you don't know? Or did it just get easier and easier as you travel through France and then into Spain?
I definitely am that person. I benefited from beforehand. Before I went on the journey, I had managed to track down most of the descendants of people who saved Frank. Facebook is incredible. Is an incredible tool, and this is a massive plus to Facebook, which there aren't that many. So I had organized meetings with these people before I went out. So we had a time and a place, and it wasn't like a complete stranger, as it were, although obviously I was a complete stranger. We'd never met before. It was like that. The first meeting I was talking about happened again and again and again in different locations, and each time it was such a sort of restoring your faith in humanity moment. Like I remember after about a week, Frank managed to make it into Switzerland with the help of the resistance, into safety of neutral Switzerland, and he was smuggled via a farmhouse under the wire from France into Switzerland. And I remember standing outside this farmhouse on the border with the descendants of the farmer who still lived there, talking about the episode and reminiscing and filling each other in on family history and stuff like that, and speaking to this old lady about other people he'd helped. This farmer had helped get into Switzerland, which included Jewish school children, other resistance fighters, lots of other amazing stories. And I remember then she said to me, but he only helped one RAF pilot, and he always told everyone that was his greatest honor, and his family's greatest honor. And just things like that was just so overwhelming. It's so hard to know how to respond. And like another time, another descendant of a woman who'd hidden Frank for 3 days in France, and she had actually been a baby at the time when Frank was staying in 1943. She was 6 months old. When I met her, she outside of the very house that Frank had stayed in, she was now 80. And I remember I arrived and walked in and we first met, and she just literally threw her hands to her face and just started crying straight away. Again, just it's so powerful, the story. And then one of the first things she told me was that when Frank had stayed in 1943 with her mother, he had held her, the baby, in his arms and thought of his own baby at home, who was my granny, who was also 6 months old at the time. So it's just lovely little things. Even now I can feel myself getting emotional remembering it. But yeah, it's just so many amazing moments like that.
At Carafem, you can choose the abortion care that works best for you. With in-person visits in Atlanta, Chicago, and the D.C. area, or medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. Some people feel more comfortable meeting with a provider in person and leaving either no longer pregnant or with pills in hand. Others prefer getting abortion pills by mail. Just fill out a short online form and, if eligible, your medication arrives in a few days in a plain package. When you choose abortion pills, Cara, our text-based abortion companion, is with you every step of the way, offering 24/7 support and answers whenever you need them. However you get care, Carafem will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carafem.org.
Wow, I mean, that it makes it even more of a profound experience, really. I mean, it is extraordinary. And so you've mentioned Switzerland, which some listeners may be thinking, oh, okay, surely you make it to Switzerland, neutral country, albeit surrounded. Surely he can just head to the British embassy and spend the rest of the war, eating Ferrero Rocher and drinking champagne.
Yes, and I think that was, vaguely an option. From what Frank left behind, he said he basically had to wrestle with his choice after he'd healed from his injuries properly, of whether to stay in Switzerland, go into the sort of system with the other Allied air crews who'd been interned there, or to try and go back into France and try to escape. Obviously, the much riskier option. And yes, if he was caught, he should hopefully be treated as a POW. But he'd be wearing civilian clothes. He'd probably have a disguise. He'd have fake documents. And the Germans obviously aren't not going to take very kindly to people like that. So it is a much riskier option. There was a crazy plan that Frank wrote about, which was, I think, was an MI9 plan, or certainly some sort of crazy plan from London, that was to, in the middle of the night, row Frank out into Lake Geneva, into the French section of Lake Geneva, and land a Sunderland flying boat on the lake and pick him up and fly him back. Which is, obviously, if you've ever seen the Sunderland in the RAF Museum, it's an absolutely huge aircraft. And to get that in and out secretly would have been a hell of a feat. But anyway, it didn't happen. And they come up with this new plan, which is long and convoluted, and nobody knows it in its entirety apart from in London, which is basically to go back over the border into France and to get a series of trains up to somewhere near Paris. And then somewhere near Paris, there's going to be, somebody with a handkerchief in their left hand who's going to take him to this field outside of this village, and they're going to do a Lysander pickup and take him home. Anyway, that falls apart. He goes over the border, and that falls apart immediately anyway, because basically it's foggy and they can't find their contact, and the curfew's approaching, and the whole plan immediately fails and breaks down. And luckily, again, another piece of luck in this story, he basically falls into the hands of local sympathetic people to the Allies, and taken into a new sort of resistance cell, as it were. And they come up with a new plan, which is totally different, heading in a totally different direction, going south to the Pyrenees, and then hopefully to Spain and Gibraltar and home that way instead.
It's an extraordinary number. There's a very good book which you may be familiar with, by Helen Fry, about MI9, and then the numbers of I think it's something extraordinary, like 2 divisions worth of of men were retrieved through these various escape lines, which is like incredible feat.
Yeah.
But once he gets to Spain, this is of course neutral, but again, yes, exactly. It's under Franco, who's obviously sympathetic to the fascist cause in Germany. So, what was Spain? What was the experience in Spain like for Frank? And for you, and for you.
I don't think it was Frank's favorite experience. So for the context, he hikes over the Pyrenees at nighttime and brutal hike led by these amazing local Catalan farmers who take him in, and he comes into Spain shattered, limping, thinking finally I've made it, hopefully to safety now, and I'm going to head to the British consul in Barcelona and get home and should be all fine. Tries to hop on a train and is arrested by Franco police and taken to this big military fortress in a town called Figueres and locked up. And he then subsequently spends the most miserable week of his life in this horrible, horrible jail that he writes about and speaks about with particular attention to detail and powerful memories of just how awful it was. And I mean, we're talking 6 or 7 men in a tiny cramped cell with no furniture, everything stone floor, stone walls, tiny window, I think a ladle full of soup a day and 1 piece of bread every other from the Red Cross. The bugs that came down from the ceiling and feasted on them in the night, and just awful conditions. And the guards, obviously horrible, and would quite regularly, lash out at the prisoners and that sort of stuff. And I remember speaking to all my family before the trip, asking for their memories. They'd always say that if you spoke to Frank about the escape, the impression given was that he spent 3.5 months in a Spanish jail and not 3.5 months escaping Europe in 4 countries. Such was how much he hated it. And I was also told he held a lasting grudge against the Spanish for the way they were treated, for the way he was treated. So it wasn't a particularly good experience, but I thought that the hike over the Pyrenees, especially for me 80 years later, was actually the most enjoyable part of my journey. Try and follow his route and piece together, where he'd gone, and we met up with another descendant of the Catalan farmer who helped him over, and their farmhouse was still there. Farms don't tend to move, and we went and saw where he slept in the loft, and they even gave us this, presented this dictionary, this French-English dictionary that Frank had given them on his journey, which was lovely. But thinking about it afterwards was probably quite a bad security breach, as he wrote his name in the front cover. So that wouldn't have been very good if the Germans had found it. But and it was lovely. It was and Pyrenees are beautiful, hiking over them now without the threat of capture, or doing it at nighttime, and the constant fear was absolutely lovely. And then we came into Figueres, visited the military fortress where he was locked up. Ate paella, drank lots of wine, and
I was going to. The food you're going on a sort of gastronomic extravaganza through South France and Spain. I mean, Frank, I assume, did not eat so well as you did.
I don't think so, but I've said that many times after the retracing that Frank couldn't have chosen a nicer route really for someone to retrace 80 years later. I mean, he crashed in Annecy, then he went to Geneva, then he went to Perpignan, over the Pyrenees to Barcelona, Madrid, and then down to Gibraltar.
Yeah, so when you were tracing his footsteps, I'm sure it was crossing your mind that this is not such a bad thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was lovely places, a lovely route.
And so the crossing into Gibraltar, which is Gibraltar's been evacuated by this stage, isn't it, from civilians, and it's a sort of essentially just a military base. And then it's a border, obviously guarded by Spanish guards, and then there's of course certain claims on Gibraltar from the Spanish. How was the crossing into Gibraltar?
I think from what he left behind, fairly easy. But by this point, he'd come out. The British had managed to get him out of the jail, and in the reason why the Spanish, I think, were locking up airmen coming over the Pyrenees was for negotiating, bargaining chips, negotiating. And so they'd organised this prisoner release, and he had been let out and was making the long slow journey to Gibraltar with lots of other airmen. So I think it was all laid on, and it was fairly easy to get in. But there was one nice thing he wrote, that when this busload of airmen were taken to Gibraltar and they eventually passed over the border, he said that lots of them had to swallow twice as they came over the border and saw a British policeman wearing a British uniform, because obviously they've been, hazardous long journeys across Europe and not knowing if they're going to get back or when. And he said that really was like a punch in the gut kind of moment, seeing that policeman. And obviously it wasn't really the same for me, but 80 years later, I came into Gibraltar, and you do genuinely walk over the border, go for passport control, stamp your passport, and then walk in. That is how it works, and how most Spanish people get into Gibraltar every day. And you do genuinely just walk through what is completely Spanish, through this passport control, and come out the other side, and there's a red telephone box, there's British police officers walking around, there's a Tesco. You're back in the UK, even though you obviously were in Spain 1 minute ago. So obviously it's not the same, but it was still quite a nice moment.
It's an amazing story. I was really enjoying your at the end of the book. You've listed out what happened to all the various characters, and there's a wonderful picture of you with Helen, who's the daughter of Frank's navigator, I think it was.
Yes.
Who she never met her father then.
No. So yeah, again, this is another lovely thing that came from doing this retracing, was that a newspaper ran a story about retracing, and somebody saw it who was connected, who knew about this crash and this event, because one of their family members was Frank's navigator. Who's a man called John Congdon, who was 26-year-old navigator, who was obviously one of the 6 men who were killed on board. And anyway, through this newspaper article, I was put in touch with John Congdon's daughter, who was born after his death. So she never actually met her biological father. And we agreed to meet up, and I went and met her, and we're now close friends. And we just have had this amazing last few months, really. It's actually been probably the most special thing from the whole book, where she's told me about her life and her upbringing, and how she was told, I think, when she was about 10, about her, because she grew up with a stepfather. Her mother remarried, but she was told when she was about 10 about her biological father. And so she did know of him, but obviously had all these siblings who were, biological siblings of her new dad, as it were, her stepdad. And it was something I think that was always, had always sort of been in her mind. And we talked through this whole crash and the fates of history, and how that could have so easily been my family as well, growing up with the exact same experiences that she's had. And I think the nicest part ever was, I think one day Helen's daughters, I was with Helen's daughters, and they were telling me how it's been so lovely for Helen, even though she's 82 now, for her to sort of, first time in her life, she's really properly come to terms with it. And I think that's such a special thing to have been a part of. And she's really enjoyed getting to know more about the father she never met. And I think it's just sort of almost being able to process it more. Obviously, you can't really when you're a 10-year-old. And then, life happens and whatever. So I think it's been one of the nicest, really has been one of the nicest parts. And hopefully, we've uncovered lots about John and, kept his memory alive a bit and allowed her family to find out more about him. And from that first meeting as well, she showed me probably the most incredible historical source I've ever seen, which really did level me, which were letters, handwritten letters from Frank, dated December 1943, so just after he'd got back from Europe. And he'd written to John's mother and father saying, "I'm so sorry John was killed. I feel terrible. I was the captain and I survived and he didn't. And these were his last words. And, he was a great man, etc., etc." And then John's parents' reply to Frank as well. And my God, that was quite difficult to see and not get emotional. But that really was something. And those letters, as you may have seen, close the book. They're just there in their entirety. But yeah, it was a really special part of the book.
Well, it's a hugely powerful story. And so listeners, I've put links in. I really do. It's a very unusual to the normal kind of World War II book that I certainly read. So I encourage everyone. This is really, as I say, very moving. So Adam, thank you so much for coming on to speak about it, and best of luck with the book.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes, including for those live events. Please share with friends and family, and if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.